back to New World next week. I'm James Corbett at CorbettReport.com.
And I'm James Evan Pilato from MediaMonarchy.com. All the cool kids want drugs in the water. We've got that story, plus some good news about illicit trails. But first, the Swamp Thing strikes back. Trump taps ex-Monsanto executive to lead wildlife agency. America's next top president says he is nominating a former executive at agribusiness giant Monsanto, which of course we know doesn't exactly exist anymore. They're retiring the name of, they've been absorbed into the Bayer monstrosity, but still in the public, still referred to as Monsanto. Nominating a former exec at Monsanto to head the Fish and Wildlife Service. Aurelia Skipwith of Indiana, currently Deputy Assistant Interior Secretary for Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, a biologist and lawyer, a deadly combination. Skipwith spent more than 6 years at Monsanto and has worked at the USDA and at the USAID, which I think we generally know is a pretty close conduit to the CIA. If confirmed by the Senate, Aurelia Skipwith would be the first African-American to head the Wildlife Agency, which has 9,000 employees and a $2.8 billion annual budget. Fish and Wildlife Service has been without a Senate-confirmed director since Trump took office in January 2017, which is a whole other set of hilarious shenanigans involving people who don't even have college degrees in the area that they want to run. Not that I'm saying that's the end-all, be-all, but just in their world, you'd think they'd have a piece of paper that says they know how to do the thing. Chris Sager, executive director of the liberal Montana-based Western Values Project, called Aurelia Skipwith, quote, a darling of corporate special interests, and said her nomination was business as usual for an administration that has sought to reward its allies at the expense of public lands and wildlife. As we know, both phony sides do that, James. Another, I think, fine tradition, fake left and the phony right. Just like Obama brought in, remember, Michael Taylor from Monsanto, and then even going several more years back, Poppy Bush got Clarence Thomas into SCOTUS. So both fake sides love the eugenics-obsessed multi-generational serial killers at Bayer Santo. James?
Indeed they do. That's a good point. And yes, to pretend like this is some new phenomenon with the Trump administration is just more of the phony, stupid, left-right garbage political game. For people who don't know about the Bayer Santo revolving door and why it is a problem, I would humbly suggest that they go back to episode 340 of my podcast, Bayer plus Monsanto equals a match made in hell, which I think puts the case strongly enough. But perhaps more to the point, people might remember one of the latest stories to come out was from that case in California with the 46-year-old former groundskeeper who sued Monsanto for the fact that the Roundup, the glyphosate in the Roundup weed killer that he was applying was responsible for his non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and he was awarded $289 million in punitive and compensatory damages as a result of winning that case, i.e. the jury upheld, yes, your cancer was the result of your handling of this glyphosate. And the judge upheld that verdict. That is the latest. The judge upholds Monsanto verdict, but cuts the reward to $78 million, $39 million punitive, $39 million compensatory, which, is still a victory and is still a court case which upholds, yes, your cancer was the result of glyphosate, a pretty important verdict. But the latest, literally just in the past day from farmfutures.com, Monsanto may get new trial on punitive damages, which basically says that if the plaintiff does not accept the reduced damages awarded by this California jury, then Monsanto will get a new trial. So who knows? The story is not necessarily over yet, and because of the Bayer Santo revolving door in government and the courts and everywhere else, it does sort of make this, put a question mark over the legal wrangling around issues like this. One can hope that ultimately this continues to be upheld, but you never know what tricks the Monsanto lawyer / whatever's have up their sleeves.
That's exactly right. Yeah. If they're the two things they're really good at is creating chimeric genomic monstrosities and also litigating the hell out of you in case you have some sort of problem against that. I mean, that's what Clarence Thomas was, a Monsanto lawyer. Michael Taylor was a Monsanto lawyer. And now this Aurelia is another Monsanto lawyer. James, I had heard and covered a little bit about the lowered damages number. And that, To put it into perspective for folks here in the States, far, far, far below what the big lotto fever is right now. Of course, we reach the big lottery fever pitch every year or so, and it reaches these astronomical levels far lower than anybody winning the big lotto even gets now, just for a little bit of perspective. That's a great welcome back here at the kickoff of Neural Next Week, episode 354 for November 1st, 2018. It is fantastic to be back. James, a really disturbing story for our second one, and it's just another kind of oldie making the rounds again. Researchers still want to put lithium in the water supply to prevent suicide. We take this from Vox. A little more information about that on the far side of this info. Lithium is a potent psychiatric drug, one of the primary prescribed medications for bipolar disorder, but it's also an element that occurs naturally all over the Earth's crust, including in bodies of water. That means that small quantities of lithium wind up in the tap water you consume every day. Just how much is in the water varies quite a bit from place to place. Naturally, that made eugenics-obsessed crazy researchers curious. Are places with more lithium in the water healthier mentally? Do places with more lithium have less depression or bipolar, or most importantly of all, fewer suicides? A 2014 review of studies concluded that the answer was yes. 4 of 5 studies reviewed found that places with higher levels of trace lithium had lower suicide rates. And Nasir Gahemi, a Tufts psychology professor who co-authored that review, argues that the effects are large. High lithium areas, he says, have suicide rates 50 to 60% lower than those of low lithium areas. They think we could save tens of thousands of lives a year with a very simple, low-cost intervention. Putting small amounts of lithium, amounts likely too small to have significant side effects, into our drinking water, the same way we put fluoride in to protect our teeth. This article goes on and on from Vox, and it even includes, of course, a podcast that they made too about it. This news flash is indeed from, I'm not just saying this to be mean, an autistic millennial named Dylan Matthews, senior correspondent at Vox. He got his start at the CIA's favorite newspaper and is known for using lots of pictures in his articles. You can learn more about that bit of truthiness from his Wikipedia entry, which we'll include in the show notes, James. I mentioned even on my morning show this morning, in addition to, of course, all the things we know that's in our water, there's also traces of hallucinogens and other banned drugs found in meats. So that's ketamine, horse tranquilizer, and, of course, antidepressants found in all kinds of meats. And then, of course, that's the gnarly factory farmed kind of meats, not the more organically raised. So, James, this idea keeps coming around again, and I believe we've heard this from some cats before, right?
We absolutely have, and I know you've been around long enough to have seen this. I've seen it. I've put it in some of my videos. Speaking about the fluoride issue in particular, because of course this is a related issue, and of course it's brought up in this retch-inducing article from Vox, which I can't really recommend people read, but I guess if you must see the propaganda, go and stomach it and read through it and see the smarm dripping from every paragraph of this. I could barely make it through without literally retching. Where they start talking about, as soon as you start talking about putting something in the water supply, you have small or anti-government people responding very vigorously against that, as if this is some sort of, why on earth would they be against this? This is all for your good. And then they go on to say, the absurd controversy continues to this day. Dr. Mehmet Oz, the wildly popular, wildly irresponsible TV doctor, has brought on a fluoride conspiracist, Aaron Brockovich of Julia Roberts movie fame, to sow fear and disinformation. If that's the reaction to an effort to improve dental health, just imagine the public outcry against a major push for adding lithium to the water. All right, so many things to break down in this article, and perhaps I will devote an entire propaganda watch to this article, but long story short, for people who don't know, and I'd like to think there is no one in our audience who doesn't know, this crosses all sorts of lines. I mean, the issue of fluoride and whether drinking fluoride in the water is actually helping your teeth is a whole other scientific issue. But beyond that, it is the forced drugging of society. Forced medication. This is a very important topic, and it's not just small or anti-government conspiracy theorists who care about it. It is humanity that should care about this. It is a crime against humanity to forced drug the population. You live in our geographical distinction, so area, so we could do whatever we want to you and your body. absolute nonsense. For people who want the argument against that, I did talk about this quite specifically 5 years ago in a GRTV report called Fluoride Fight, the Forced Drugging of Society, which brings up that issue specifically. And that's the key issue here. If they can do it with fluoride, they can do it with lithium. And if they can do it with lithium, who knows what else they'll decide is good for you and put in your water in this gigantic, uncontrolled experiment in which there's no way to really know how it's really affecting the population as a whole, because, of course, no doctor would give the same prescription and the same dosage to every single patient that walks in the door, regardless of whether they exhibit any symptoms or not, or anything like that. That's insanity. We would never allow that in a doctor's office, but for some reason put in the water supply. Sure, what could go wrong? Oh boy, do I have a Batman movie you guys should watch. Anyway, this is an incredibly important issue. It goes to the fundamental point about who owns your body, which is one of the fundamental issues about governance in general, and they want to just drip it in all this smear and smarm and smugness. The only good thing to come out of this, I think, is, I don't know about your experience, James, but my experience seeing this online, whenever there's a comment section or ability for people to talk back to this, no one's buying this. No one these days, no one under 40 who has grown up in the internet age is going to just absorb this and go, oh, okay, this is the new thing that we must all believe. Okay, lithium is good. People fight back against this, and deservedly so. It is just nonsense.
Well, that's the interesting thing to say that we've seen this make the rounds before. I mean, it was the Paul Ehrlich and the eco-science guys who pushed this 40 years ago with, again, the hip intelligentsia kind of college set. And it kind of had an effect then. And James, so now we see it basically with the kind of the young, hip, Vox, podcast making set. Even sidebar, I started reading a new horror comic the other day called Man-Eaters that features putting drugs in the water as part of just like the main plot point. So it is this not new idea kind of currying favor with the hip, young comics and podcast set. I guess that makes us look kind of old now, James. Our third and final story on this New World Next Week is a good news story and also one fairly philosophical. We often kind of talk about, and there's the old adage, small minds talk about people and events. We want to be of a larger mind and talk about ideas. An interesting one from The Guardian, believe it or not. Desire paths, the illicit trails that defy the urban planners. We've all been there. You want a shortcut to the bus stop, office, or corner shop, but there's no designated path. Others before you have already flattened the grass or cut a line through the hedge. Why not, you think? So goes the logic of desire paths, described, I think, and named by Robert McFarlane as paths and tracks made over time by the wishes and feet of walkers, especially those paths that run contrary to design or planning. Calls them free will ways. The New Yorker has other names like cow paths, pirate paths, which I like, social trails. Jay and Barry described them as paths that have made themselves. Reddit apparently has desire path threads. Tens of thousands of people following them, delighting in the more mysterious and illogical seeming of them. They can form anywhere from apparently forgotten corners of cities to the grounds of national governments. Some are so well established that you can essentially see them from satellite imagery. Desire paths have been described as illustrating the tensions between the native and the built environment and our relationship to them. Because they often form in areas where there are no pavements, they can be seen to indicate the yearning of those wishing to walk a way for city dwellers to write back to city planners, giving feedback with their feet. But as well as revealing the path of least resistance, they can also reveal where people refuse to tread. If you've been walking the same route for years and you got an itchy-footed urge to go off the path, even by just a few feet or meters, it's probably something you can identify with. It's this idea that led another academic journal to describe these desire paths as a record of civil disobedience. James, I know this is something you have precisely talked about before, and we've, of course, all seen that meme of the fence put over the sidewalk that everyone can just go around, and that's, in essence, government planning versus free will ways. James?
Exactly right, and thank you for bringing a bit of philosophical reflection to our podcast here. I do appreciate it, because it is profoundly important. It seems so simple, but it says something really important about the nature of humanity and the nature of economics, and many other things. So let me take this opportunity to plug something that I've done. This is getting very self-pluggy, but hey, why not? I did talk about this quite specifically in a video that I did a year ago called Economics in One Image, which I am tickled pink to note that there were some people who truly didn't understand that video because I didn't elaborate and I didn't really talk about it. But it is exactly this point: desire paths, showing that you can plan all you want. You can have central planners who decide in a committee this is the best way for people to go from point A to point B, but people will decide otherwise if they see a better route, and they will enact that. And that has, again, this is not just about the way people walk, although it is about that, but it's also about the way people interact in all sorts of different ways. You must go along this path, you must do this. No, I want to do that. And everyone does that, and suddenly you have a new path. And that's an extremely important point, and it says a lot of things. So I'll just leave it there. I'll leave it to people to look at my Economics in One Image video for the articulation of why that's important in an economic context.
I think I first really consciously thought about this when I saw it with my own eyes back when I was still in college. Towards the end of the college years, of course, you're able to make it to the cooler upperclassmen part of campus. These new sort of quads that were relatively new. They probably only been built in the late 70s, probably at the earliest. And very instantly, you could see all these dirt paths in different ways, deviating from the obviously dumb ways they had built the sidewalks. And that was one of the earliest parts I kind of started to think about this, how people vote with their feet. And I've been thinking about it even more recently, James, moving down here to the American Southwest. It's not super walkable friendly, especially coming from a place like Oregon, moving down to New Mexico. It's kind of lack of sidewalks. So again, I've been kind of thinking about this idea. So not only physically, but also just a little more philosophically. And that's how we close episode 354 of New World next week. Hey, I can do it too, Mr. Pluggy. I am back on the air Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 Pacific time at MediaMonarchy.com/listen. As I like to say, I stream news, music, memes, and more, and I hope people come check it out.
And on a deprogramming note, again, let me stress, as you will have noted, I'm sure, I am not putting out very much right now. I'm not publishing much to CorbettReport.com in the last couple of weeks, and probably won't be for the next week or so. As, once again, let me remind people, I am working on something behind the scenes that you will see very soon, and you will know it when you see it. But it is taking up all of my time and attention at the moment, so I don't have a lot of time to be doing Propaganda Watch or whatever else at this point. So in the next few days, hey, maybe I'll put up some of the videos that I mentioned here. I'll put them up on the front page of CorbettReport.com, and if anyone has any suggestions for anything that they want to see on the front page during this absence, leave them in the comments, and I'll do my best to accommodate. But as I say, it'll be a little bit slower here at CorbettReport.com for the next 10 days or so.
All right. Maybe, of course, there's probably no shortage of things to maybe have an open thread about there on the old Corbett Report, as we have pretty much shut down, of course, the Halloween and, of course, the real fears of the big selections coming up here in the States. James will continue to watch all that stuff, and it's good to be back with you, buddy, after a little bit of a break.
Absolutely. Let's do it again next week. Talk to you later.
All right. Take care.
You're listening to the Corbett Report. CorbettReport.com.
Welcome, friends. This is James Corbett of CorbettReport.com with your Propaganda Watch for September 10th, 2018. And since we are right on the cusp of the 17th anniversary of the 9/11 false flag attack, it is appropriate today that we examine some propaganda related to 9/11. And of course, there is no shortage of supply of such propaganda produced around the time of the 9/11 anniversary each year, this year being no exception. And surprise, surprise, today we'll be taking our cue from CNN. Not that they are the only propaganda outlet that is engaged in this type of disgusting skewing of 9/11 at this time of year, but they are the guilty ones in this particular case. September 11th terror attack fast facts from September 4th, 2018, which begins with this particularly telling slideshow. It's very interesting. So here is the iconic image of firefighters George Johnson, Dan McWilliams, and Billy Eisengrein raising a flag at Ground Zero in New York after the terror attacks on September 11, 2001. The scene was immortalized by photographer Thomas E. Franklin. The image has been widely reproduced in the decade since it was first published. And so there you go. There's, of course, the iconic propaganda image from 9/11, the firefighters raising the flag in the rubble of at Ground Zero, which, as they say, becomes this iconic image reproduced, for example, on page 32 of the Record on September 12th, 2001 in New Jersey. And then on The Sun, for example, and Newsweek and a number of other outlets. And then it became so iconic that they actually restaged the scene at the World Series that year, involving, I think these are just random firemen. I don't think those are the actual, but anyway, restaging the scene for the onlookers at the World Series baseball game. And then you have, of course, on decorating the FDNY's trucks. And then you get commemorative coins and bronze statues. You get a commemorative stamp unveiled by none other than George W. And, of course, unveiled to the public amongst much fanfare. You get it on the hood of racing cars. You have T-shirts. You have it on commemorative knives. Is there such a thing as a commemorative knife? You get these snow globes. You get this one, which is particularly disturbing, which is, of course, some part of sculpture that has been created, but here it is being housed in the warehouse, and the firemen being hung by the neck to keep them upright, I assume. A commemorative plate. Commemorative earrings. Earrings. Seriously, people are going to wear earrings of this flag raising. And then artwork and pictures and what have you. So this is the propaganda image that is the image that speaks 1,000 words about 9/11. All you need to know about 9/11 is in this image, right, guys? Because here it is, here's the destruction, but they're raising the American flag. It's this iconic moment in American history, and so it has been propagandized. And then, of course, after observing that little slideshow, then CNN gets into the fast facts about 9/11. You know, just to get caught up to speed on what this whole war of terror thing is about, just in case you forgot or didn't know in the first place. And not very surprisingly, they go into exactly the type of facts that you would expect them to go into. The type that would be that is memorialized every single year in these never forget type articles. And I just wrote my own editorial about this, never forget what the deep state wants you to remember about 9/11, where I kind of satirize these types of articles and the types of fast facts that they generally provide you with. So if you haven't seen that yet, I suggest you go and check that article out. But, you know, it's the 19 men hijacking 4 fuel-loaded U.S. commercial airplanes. You know, all of the official story, of course, exactly as it's presented by the 9/11 Commission report and the U.S. government. And they give the little timeline of the different things, and then going on through the years, ultimately talking about how the firefighters, oh yeah, by the way, these firefighters, these iconic firefighters that we love and cherish, and we will remember them forever. Oh yeah, they all started dying from the dust relatively soon. You have people in 2002 already having been declared dead from the dust exposure. And then subsequent rulings later on that lymphoma and lung disease and other diseases are being attributed directly to exposure at Ground Zero. And then they just sort of mention, oh yeah, Obama signs the Zadroga 9/11 Health and Compensation Act of 2010. So it kind of, oh, well, look, we're paying them a bit of money to basically take care of the fact that, oh yeah, they kind of died or are dying as a result of 9/11 still. And then, you know, they just kind of gloss over that and then back onto the fast facts about, oh, economic impact and cleanup at Ground Zero. And, oh yeah, by the way, the Homeland Security system was created as a result of, the 9/11. So there you go. And that's what you need to know about 9/11. Now, obviously, again, that's not what you need to know about 9/11, but it's especially galling that they talk about, oh yeah, and people are dying of the dust, and but don't worry, the governments came in to save the day with this Droga Health Act and take care of these firefighters, basically. I mean, yeah, they're going to die, but at least they'll have some good medical treatment while they do, right? Well, that's probably not even true in and of itself, but of course, the excluded part of all of this is what I mentioned in last week's New World Next Week. Christine Todd Whitman and the EPA and the U.S. government knowingly, deliberately lying to all of the people who rushed into Ground Zero to basically kill them. Not just killing the people on the day, but killing people for years and years afterwards. If the brave men and women who had rushed to the World Trade Center in the chaotic days after 9/11 to help with the search and rescue had done so knowing the risks they were facing, that would be one thing. But of course they did not. They had been given false assurances by Christine Todd Whitman, the EPA administrator who assured the public just days into the cleanup that the air was safe to breathe.
You know asbestos was in there, is in those buildings, lead is in those buildings. There are the VOCs. However, the concentrations are such that they don't pose a health hazard.
Yes, they don't pose a health hazard. And of course, that wasn't the only statement. Please do go and read through the whole transcript if you haven't yet. Hyperlinks to all of the different statements and when they were made and the absolute bullet point case of how the Christine Todd Whitman and the EPA killed and is still killing 9/11 first responders is in this report, which will obviously be linked up in the show notes. Truly horrific. And of course, that is not the type of fast fact you're going to get from CNN about this. And so it is the case that the firefighters in this case are just a convenient prop to use for the propaganda of the mainstream establishment in, well, yeah, remember 9/11, but just kind of remember it vaguely with a couple of fast facts. I mean, don't actually think about what really happened that day or in the subsequent days and weeks. Don't think about that too hard. Just trust us. Here are the facts that you need to know. And look at the firemen. And aren't they so great? Oh, but they're dying now, but who cares? And on that note, for people who do check out the Never Forget article that I just recently wrote satirizing this type of piece, we had Corbett Report user SC Pat commenting, nice piece, James. You covered so many important points. As part of the Never Forget the government-approved official 9/11 narrative articles referenced, the emotion I think they are intended to evoke is a swelling pride of patriotism. And then he points to a particular picture of a firefighter crying while nuzzling an American flag, with the caption that they ran with on news.com.au, "This guy wasn't alone in seeking comfort in a familiar symbol after the attacks." And doesn't that just summarize what this is all about? Of course, people do seek comfort from familiar symbols in the wake of any major traumatizing event. And that's, of course, exactly what 9/11 was intended to be when it was written about beforehand. The new Pearl Harbor referenced in the PNAC document in the year 2000, talking about the catalyzing and catastrophic event. And here is the myth-making that went on to make sure that that was emblazoned in people's mind. Remember, 9/11 means we were attacked, but don't worry, the firefighters and other brave heroes are going to raise the American flag and all will be well once we go and bomb Afghanistan and Iraq, and we'll end up in Libya and Syria and elsewhere. I mean, whatever. Don't think about the details. Just think about this image. This is what it is. Swelling pride should be filling your heart every time you see these dying first responders, because that's what America's about. Anyway, I just thought this is particularly galling piece of propaganda, and I wanted to bring it to your attention, as we are, of course, entering the most propagandistic part of the yearly propaganda cycle. That's going to do it for today. I hope you do stay tuned because, of course, there is some very big coverage coming up very soon on CorbettReport.com, so please stay tuned for that. I'm James Corbett. Looking forward to talking to you again very soon.
You're listening to The Corbett Report. CorbettReport.com.